Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the final day of the Culturally Competent Conversations for Equity and Belongingness Summit, or the C3EB Summit. I am so thrilled for this keynote that is about to happen, and the speaker is not just a powerful voice, but a dear friend of mine. So I am so thrilled about that. But before I introduce everybody to our wonderful keynote speaker for this session, couple of housekeeping notes. As usual, all of you should be used to this by now if you're attending these. Make sure you comment on YouTube, our YouTube channel, or our Facebook page. Whether you're watching this live or you're watching this later, make sure you comment, because we will be monitoring our comments and we will make sure our keynote speaker gets to your questions, and you can get your questions answered even if you are not able to get them answered right now in this session. We will make sure your questions get answered, so make sure you put your questions in the comments. Secondly, this summit would not be possible, and future programming would not be possible if not for our wonderful, amazing partners and sponsors who believed in the C3EB Summit dream and decided to walk the walk with us toward equity, toward belongingness, and toward intentional inclusion. So my humble, absolutely humble gratitude to Essential IT, our web team, who has been my backbone through this entire project, to Defy the Status Quo Marketing, who've been our content specialists, and to Zanzibar Enterprises, who is our platinum sponsor, and to the Nielsen Company, our Pearl partner. Thank you to all of you, and thank you to all the individual donors as well. If you still want to donate, it is not too late, because we are going to continue bringing these programs to you, and so every penny helps. You can go to www.c3eb.com, register yourself for future, for information about future events, and as soon as you do, you will get the donation information, and you can feel free to share that with everybody and help us out in that way. And now, without further ado, I want to read you our keynote speaker's bio. I love this bio, so I'm gonna have fun reading this. Our wonderful, amazing keynote speaker for today is Bri Jenkins, who is the founder at Briona Jenkins Consulting. Given the title, the love child of Oprah, Beyonce, and Michelle Obama, yep, you heard that right, Briona Jenkins is a public speaker, activist for the LGBTQIA+ female and people of color communities, and has years of experience using her platform to evoke change. Originally from Hamden, Connecticut, Bri attended Albertus Magnus College, a small liberal arts college rich in the Dominican tradition, which is where she completed her undergrad as a sociology major with a concentration in social work. Bri has over 8 years of experience in the nonprofit sector. She worked for a variety of organizations where she was able to serve adults and children with developmental disabilities, single adults and families experiencing homelessness, and was in development and community engagement at an organization that serves LGBTQIA+ youth and young adults. And after she was recently furloughed from her first tech job due to coronavirus, what does this amazing superwoman do? Instead of, scrambling for other jobs or anything else, she decides to get even more active in the community and decides to found Briona Jenkins Consulting. So that's what she's doing now. When not at work, Bri is very involved in the Austin community. She is the co-director of New Leaders Council's Austin chapter board, sits on the board of Lone Star Victim Advocacy Project, and has served on the boards of Keep Austin Fed and Austin Black Pride. She also appears on panels and podcasts all over the city, and this year spoke at the 2020 Women's March rally in Austin, and also Boss Babe's annual State of the Uterus event, the Texas State Business Week, and on a virtual SXSW panel. Whew, what don't you do? That might have been easier. She also hosts a podcast called The Tea with Bri, which is mind-blowingly awesome, by the way. So I highly recommend you all check that out. And on December 4th of 2019, Bri Jenkins won the Austin LGBT Chamber of Commerce Rising Star Award. And this is just a brief bio. She has not even mentioned a lot of her accomplishments, I think, for the sake of brevity. So it is with absolute honor and pleasure and thrill that I'm so proud to introduce my fellow New Leaders Council family, sister, friend, and our amazing keynote speaker, Bri Jenkins. Bri, take it away, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I always love when people read my bio, and I get a little awkward because there's so much there and still so much that's not there. But I'm excited to share this space with y'all today. I prepared a presentation to go along with my speech, and then I also want to leave some space to answer questions. I'm going to have a presentation up, but if there's anything that y'all want to send over to me via questions, feel free to drop it in the chat, and I will get to it once I get through my presentation. So let's get started. Change happens in the uncomfortable spaces, making space for LGBTQIA+ inclusion. AJ just read my bio, but again, I wanted to say, hello, my name is Bri Jenkins. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a queer Black woman living in Austin, Texas. I've been living in Austin since May of 2016, and my background is in nonprofit work. But this year with coronavirus hitting, I decided to start my own consulting business. Briona Jenkins Consulting helps nonprofits with their development, fundraising, and marketing goals. I also help for-profit businesses with their philanthropy, and then I also help those who are more wealthy and celebrities here in town, helping them get connected to nonprofit organizations that they will be interested in supporting. Today's agenda, we'll be reviewing some terms that I think all of us need to know what they mean in order to be more inclusive to the LGBTQIA community at work, in our personal lives, and in our community. I'll give a brief history on the LGBTQIA+ community, the struggle of being in the LGBTQIA+ community at work, and how allies can help their LGBTQIA coworkers, friends, and family. Where did this quote come from? Change happens in the uncomfortable spaces. I said this back when I was on a panel in June. I was talking about how I kept hearing from white people how they weren't talking to this or that family member or friend because of their racist comments or beliefs. I mentioned that I believe that change happens in the uncomfortable places. You choosing not to talk to your racist relative or friend does nothing for me or other marginalized folks that you support. You have the ability to talk to these people and try to educate and change their minds, a privilege that I will never have. And so a couple of folks went to protests, and this is actually one of the signs that someone who saw me speak created, talking about how change happens in the uncomfortable places. If we are hoping that change happens and hoping to evoke differences in the lives of others, we have to be willing to get uncomfortable. I always tell people that if you're uncomfortable for 5 minutes, imagine how it feels to be a marginalized person going through the life every day. So if you can be uncomfortable for 5 minutes in order to help the world be a better place for those who are often uncomfortable, then I feel like you are doing a great job at doing this work. Terms that I think you should know before we get started. For those of you who don't know, LGBTQIA is a common abbreviation for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and agender or asexual. So it's kind of an all-encompassing abbreviation for anyone who is on the gender spectrum, the sexuality spectrum, who identifies outside of being straight or cis, which is cisgender, or their gender they're assigned at birth. Gender identity is a person's sense of being masculine or feminine or not falling into either of those gender identities. Sexual identity, how a person identifies physically, male, female, in between, beyond, or neither. Sexual orientation, the desire for intimate, emotional, and or sexual relationships with people of the same gender or sex, another gender or sex, or multiple genders or sexes. Queer is a term, an umbrella term, which embraces a matrix of sexual preferences, orientations, and habits of the non-exclusively heterosexual and monogamous majority. This term has been reclaimed by the community. I want to point out that queer used to be a derogatory term, and you'll often hear a lot of older folks in the LGBTQIA community who still have a really big problem with this word because it was seen as such a harsh word. But later generations, so millennials and the generation after that, have reclaimed the term as an umbrella term for how they identify. Ally is someone who stands with or advocates for individuals and groups other than their own. We'll be having a full conversation about allyship later in this presentation. BIPOC, or BIPOC, stands for Black, Indigenous, Person, or People of Color. Institutional racism, a form of racism that is embedded as normal practice within society or an organization. It can lead to such issues as discrimination in criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, political power, and education, among others. Microaggression, a statement, action, or incident regarded as an instance of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, such as a racial or ethnic minority. AJ mentioned before that I have a podcast called The Tea with Bri, and a friend and I actually had a whole episode about the term microaggression. I personally don't agree with the term microaggression. I'm a believer in that all aggressions are aggressions, and by saying micro, you minimize the impact that it has on someone. A lot of my friends and I talk about impact versus intention. So you might have thought that this wouldn't be as impactful as it was, but you have no idea how it's going to affect someone. So when I think of microaggression, I think of that. It's just an aggression. Saying it's micro takes away from how powerful it is and how hurtful it is to others. Privilege, a special benefit or advantage that may be earned or unearned. A lot of us know about white privilege, but there's also educational privilege, where you live, having housing, being able to have a well-paying job, speaking English being your first language is a privilege. So there's a lot of privileges that I want us to be aware of as we continue to go through this PowerPoint together. And then racism, prejudice, discrimination, or directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular race, racial, or ethnic group, typically one that is in the minority or marginalized. For some historical context, so the LGBTQIA community, Pride Month just passed in June. Here in Austin, we also have Pride Month in Austin in August. So the Stonewall riots, also called the Stonewall Uprising, began in the early hours of June 28, 1969, when New York police officers raided the Stonewall Inn, a gay club located in Greenwich Village in New York City. The raid sparked a riot among bar patrons and neighborhood residents as police roughly hauled employees and patrons out of the bar, leading to 6 days of protests and violent clashings with law enforcement outside the bar on Christopher Street, in neighboring streets in nearby Christopher Park. The Stonewall riots served as a catalyst for the gay rights movements in the United States around the world. The beginning of the Stonewall riots have been credited to Marsha P. Johnson, a Black trans woman who took care of LGBTQIA folks and young adults living on the street. During this time, people would get arrested for dressing in clothes that were, quote, not gender appropriate, or for being a member of the LGBTQIA plus communities. Photos and stories about their arrests would be published in the papers, leading to arrests and people losing their jobs. So you could be arrested back in the 60s for being in this community. If you were caught at these raids, your arrest and your photo would be published in the papers, and it would lead to people getting fired from work. As we think about being in this community, we also have to take into the fact that there are people of color who are also LGBTQIA, and there's a bunch of things that feed into your identity. And so intersectionality is what that is called. Kimberly Crenshaw is a law professor and social theorist who first coined the term in her 1989 paper that she wrote. Intersectionality is a framework for conceptualizing a person, group of people, or social problem as affected by a number of discrimination and disadvantages. It takes into account people's overlapping identities and experiences in order to understand the complex of prejudices they face. So I always tell people, when I do speaking engagements, that I am a Black queer woman. And I make that known to people because those are three intersections that I live at, and that really affects my identity. So I am Black. So I have to deal with the racism and bigotry that comes along with being a Black person. I am a woman, so I have to deal with misogyny and sexism. I am a queer person, so I have to also deal with people who are homophobic, queerphobic, who don't like people in this community. And as we go on, we see different things: your age, your culture, your gender expression, your mental health status, and if you're dealing with any mental health issues. Again, education, your first language. There's a lot of things that feed into intersectionality. And so as we think of people and how they're going to become allies and serve this, excuse me, and serve this community, especially at work, if we think about that, like how much feeds into that when you show up to work. Are you able to be your full self? Are you able to be out at work? Are you able to, deal with everything you've been dealing with? Are people making space for you at your job? So it's a lot of stuff that feeds into intersectionality when we show up to work. And then also inclusivity. I think a lot of people right now are thinking of how to be inclusive. So you'll see in the photo I'm using here, it is the rebrand of the Pride flag. And on this, it was the original rainbow flag, but then they also added in Black and brown to show diversity in racial colors, and then the white, pink, and light blue to incorporate the trans flag as well. So as we know, a lot of history has been whitewashed in order to center the story of white people. The LGBTQIA plus community history is no different. For a long time, being queer was equated to being white, and we still see that play out today. Statistically, BIPOC folks who identify as LGBTQIA are more vulnerable to stigma, violence, and discrimination due to their real or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity than their white counterparts. And we really see that in the trans community. Black and brown trans women are killed and murdered at an alarmingly higher rate than their white counterparts. And so we talk about inclusivity, you have to also bring into the fact of, are we taking that inclusivity and people's intersectionality and helping to protect them that way? As we we're saying before, the intersectionality of being Black and queer and a woman, how that feeds into other people's lives as well. So when we think about inclusivity, you have to think about making spaces inclusive, making them diverse, making them equitable and equal. And I really want to take that apart for a second of people who think that being equal and equitable are the same thing, and they are not. Being equal means that everyone gets the same amount of something, but equitable means, are you then also making sure that you're making it accessible for them? One example I've been hearing of, when you go to a dinner and everyone is served the same dinner, but only some people get the proper utensils to eat their meal. So everyone's given the same equal amount, but you didn't make it equitable because you didn't give everyone silverware. So that's a thing that we need to also think about when we talk about being at work, being inclusive at work, and making sure it's a brave space and a safe space for people. So being LGBTQIA at work. This is some information that I pulled from a resource that is labeled in the lower right-hand corner. But on June 15th of this year, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 protects employees from discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. That means that workers across the US cannot be fired for being LGBTQIA+. Prior to this ruling, there was no state level protection for sexual orientation or gender identity in 28 of the 50 US states. So that means this year was the first year that everyone in this country who was LGBTQIA was protected and couldn't be fired from work for being in this community. Here in Texas, we had it here in Austin that you had safeties in place, but other places in Texas, people would get fired. I went to a dinner 2 years ago, a gala dinner raising money for a local organization. And they had a teacher who was teaching in Dallas, who was an art teacher, and she was fired for being LGBTQIA. And what had happened with her was, her kids came back from summer vacation and they were asking, how was your summer? And she simply said, my wife and I had a really great summer. We went to Europe for the summer. And so one kid went home and was talking to their parents that night at dinner, how was your day? What'd you learn at school? And the kid was like, well, my teacher and her wife went to Europe, like a simple conversation. And a number of parents called the school saying that this teacher was pushing the LGBT or TQIA or gay agenda onto their kids because she was telling her story to them. So this woman was fired from her job. I can't remember her name right now. I will try to find it for y'all. But yeah, she got let go from her job, and she's been working with the ACLU and another number of other law firms and equality organizations to fight her case because she was let go for being LGBTQIA. Out of a number of estimated 8.1 million LGBTQIA workers aged 16 or older, nearly half, so 3.9 million, lived in states with no protections. 1/5 or 20% of LGBTQIA Americans have experienced discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. People are more likely to experience discrimination than white people if they're people of color. They have not been paid equally. So there's just all these things that go into, the more intersections you hold. So not only are you LGBTQIA, but you're also a person of color, going back to the intersectionality I was talking about. It feeds into all these things that are kind of stacked up against you that goes into your identity being at work, and the things that you'll face, from jokes to harassment to just not being paid the same. There's just all these things that feed into it that you will have to experience because of your identity. I think a lot of people right now are having conversations of, talking with marginalized folks about things that they've been experiencing. As myself being an activist here in Austin, again, being a Black queer woman, I often am asked to give examples of experiences that I have had. So a lot of the time I tell the story of, being a Black woman with natural hair, which y'all will see when I am done with this presentation. I have had natural hair for a long time, but when I was younger, it was seen as unprofessional if you had natural hair or braids or, locks or all these things, all the hair types that weren't straight, like my white counterparts. And so I shared an article a couple months ago that showed state protections for people of color with natural hair. One example I often think back to before I get into that story is when we saw the young man maybe a year or two ago who was in a wrestling match, who was forced to cut his hair, to cut his locks at a wrestling match because they were, quote, seen as, not within the rules. Like there was an actual rule as to what your hair had to look like in order to wrestle. So he had to cut his hair in front of all these people. So just thinking about how traumatic that was, how invasive that was, especially in the Black community, our hair is such a pivotal point in our identity. So to get back to the story, I had posted about that story with that young man, and then also the protections that were getting put into place, and just posted them on my Facebook and said that this is really important, and I'm so glad that this is happening. And having seen white people who have dreads who are seen as edgy, but if there's a Black person with dreads, they're seen as dirty or unprofessional, and how important it is to make sure that we are protecting Black people with natural hair at work. And this woman who I grew up with commented and it was like, I've never seen this happen. So I can't believe this actually happened. This can't be happening. And just the minimization of her take on my experience, her as a white woman with straight hair, having never lived a life in my body, when I, as a Black person, am telling you how important this is, and her just being able to come on and be like, this isn't happening simply because I posted or because she hadn't experienced it. And so one of the things I have to tell people when you're at work, when people tell you things that they're experiencing, or you have friends in your life who are experiencing things, just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it's not happening. And that is a big thing that a lot of people of color and other marginalized folks are really voicing right now is, one, it is not our job to tell you our stories, to relive our trauma. And we've been seeing this a lot with videos of Black people who were murdered by the police, and those videos are shared. And a lot of Black people and allies have been speaking up of why people feel the need to essentially re-traumatize the Black community by showing these videos. And so a thing I always tell people is that, when someone tells you something, believe them. If it's not your experience, that does not mean that isn't happening to other people. But I think that's a really important thing to touch upon as we think about how we're being more inclusive in this community as allies. So what is an ally? An ally is someone who is not a member of an underrepresented group, but who takes action to support that group. It is up to people who hold positions of power to be active allies to those with less access, and to take responsibility for making changes that will help others be successful. So I think about this in the regards of the LGBTQIA plus community. And I think a big way that allies show up is during Pride Month in June. We see all of these large companies who, put a rainbow on everything from koozies to water bottles to specialty drinks, who show that their allyship in that situation. But lately, a lot of people have been having the conversation of, are these people actual allies, or is this performative allyship? And by performative allyship, that means, are you just being an ally in the time when it's convenient for you? As an ally, you can't just be an ally when it's convenient. You can't just be an ally when it's niche or it's in the news, or when other people around you are also allies. Being an ally is a full-time job, just like I can't stop being Black, I can't stop being queer, and I can't stop being a woman. When you're an ally, that is an all year, everyday thing that you do, just like people who hold these identities who you're being an ally to. And in some examples of performative allyship in regards to Pride Month is these companies who are, willing to put rainbows on everything, but then, asking the question, well, are you donating a portion of your proceeds to orgs that serve this community? Or, people right now with, Black Lives Matter stuff, like shirts and all those things, same question. Are you doing the work of what it means to be an ally? Are you protesting? Are you donating? Are you doing all these things outside of just, kind of wearing this badge of honor when it's convenient and everyone else is doing it? I think a really big thing I paid attention to, and my friend Brittany and I had a whole conversation about this on my podcast as well. We're all on social media, either on Instagram or Facebook or what have you, and seeing these large Instagram accounts, influencers, brands who were, doing the Black squares or having Pride stuff or what have you. But, we also saw folks who didn't say anything. And one of my friend's mom once said to me, like, your silence says more than you ever will. And so by you sitting here saying nothing, you're also feeding into that. The whole silence equals violence. If you are not showing up and using your platform to evoke change and be an ally, then what are you doing? And I think that's a really big question that a lot of people are having to toil with themselves now. What does it mean for me to be an ally? How do I make sure I'm doing research and educating myself, not exhausting Black people or queer people and asking them to do the work for me? Right now, I've been having a lot of people coming into my inbox asking me questions. And so personally, I've been sending them to my website where I have a lot of information, blog posts I've written, interviews I've done, my podcast itself, having resources already done so I don't have to keep doing the emotional labor of making myself accessible in that way. And so as we continue to think, of allyship, being inclusive, making sure that we are making safe and brave spaces. And what I mean by a brave space is I don't think anyone has the right to tell someone that a space is safe. You don't have the same lived experiences as someone. So I, as a Black queer woman who comes from a two-family household, speaks English as a first language, has been educated, has all these life experiences, I may walk into a space and feel it is a safe space for me. But another queer Black woman who doesn't have the same background as me can walk into that same space and it isn't a safe space for her. It might be a brave space and a space she's willing to be in and participate in, but she has to come in and feel it and make that space safe for her. So yeah, that is my presentation. And I left some space to ask questions in the chat, to answer some questions. But in the meantime, as those questions come through, I wanted to leave y'all with some next steps. So next steps and some examples on how to create change, especially at work. So I often tell people that you can't just be worried about diversity, equity, inclusion at work. These are all things that we should be doing in our lives. So making sure we diversify our friend groups, making sure our kids play with other kids from different racial backgrounds and identities. Making sure that your job's health insurance includes gender care, parental leave for all parents, and much more, including pronouns in email signatures and business cards. A lot of folks who are non-binary, genderqueer, or along the gender spectrum have reported that the more they see the use of pronouns, the more they feel like those spaces are safe for them. Having gender-neutral bathrooms at your office and all events. So a single-stall bathroom really helps folks who are, again, trans, non-binary, genderqueer, or along all spectrums of the gender identity, just giving them a safe place to use the restroom. It has been reported that kids who don't have a safe bathroom or a single stall bathroom to use at school will just hold it all day because they don't want to have that interaction of going to the bathroom and something happening. So we have students who are just holding it all day versus if we just made a single stall bathroom for them. At companies, we have ERGs, or employee resource groups. These are groups that help to create community within companies. So there's, Black at Facebook, Pride at Facebook. I know Dropbox and RetailMeNot have employee resource groups. eBay, EA, like all these bigger tech companies have employee resource groups so that folks can build community amongst themselves at work. And have a safe space to talk about these things, meet people from similar backgrounds, and help build community that way. And then also doing your research. I, again, always tell people that yes, Google is free, but also Google could sometimes have the wrong answer. So reading books, following activists online. I love Baratunde Thurston, Rachel Cargill, Brittany Packnett. A lot of Black activists who are doing this important work, queer activists like Aidan Dowling, who have been talking about their experiences of being trans and what that means. Alok, who talks about being a non-binary person of color and their experiences there. So there's a lot of people on Instagram and social media, YouTube, who are doing this work, who are giving out essentially free education to make it more accessible so that more people can understand. There's some questions. Do you have tools for parents to help have discussions with their children? So I used to work at an organization called Out Youth here in Austin. It's a 30-year-old Austin-based nonprofit that serves LGBTQIA+ youth and their allies, so parents, partners, all that sort of stuff. So Out Youth was really big on creating safe spaces. And we also had a space for parents who were having a tough time understanding what it meant for your kid to be in this community. So I always recommend them. Although they're only based in Austin, they have a lot of resources there. They've been doing an educational series this summer. I actually spoke on a panel about tools for parents to talk about being queer. It was called a conversation with a queer adult for parents. The Trevor Project, they do a really amazing work. They were one of the first folks to have a nationwide suicide prevention hotline for LGBTQIA+ youth. Trying to think, GLAD, PFLAG, those two, GLAD and PFLAG are specifically for parents of LGBTQIA+ folks. So yeah, there's a lot of orgs out there doing really great work. I think if you just Google LGBTQIA+ tools for parents, a lot of stuff will come up. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. But I would say the Trevor Project, GLAD, PFLAG, and Out Youth here in Austin are really good places to start. Don't see any more questions. I'm really grateful to have shared this time with y'all today. I'm grateful that AJ was able to call me in. I still have time for some questions. I built it in to the presentation. So yeah, I'm just gonna sit here for a couple, maybe like one more minute, see if any more questions want to come in. Also, AJ, if you want to come on and ask me anything. But it's been really great to be able to share this space with y'all. I will also put up my contact information. But I'm available on my website, Briona Jenkins, it's my full name.com, BrionaJenkins.com. And it's also the same on Instagram, Briona Jenkins on Instagram. My podcast is The Tea with Bri. On that podcast, I have over 50 episodes talking with guests about their life experiences. My guests pick the topic that we talk about, and then we have an hour-long conversation. We've had conversations on being Black and queer in Austin. We've had conversations of a Black nurse and how that plays into, the racial injustices that she sees at work. We talked about microaggressions, performative allyship, defunding the police, being a photographer, serving students on the autism spectrum. There's just a lot of good conversation there. So if you like what you heard today, like I said, I have 50 something episodes of information waiting for you over at The Tea with Bri, and that's available at theteawithbripodcast.com. Hello.
Hey, that was amazing as usual, but I knew that already about you, which is why, I asked you if you would come do this for me.
I have a question that just came in. Someone asked, can you explain the term Latinx? I've seen it a lot lately and Googled it, and I don't understand what it was saying, if you're comfortable explaining it.
Perfect. I didn't know if you could see that, so I was about to read it. So
Latinx, I think what I understand of the term, Latin or Latin language can be very gendered, either male or female. So Latino and Latina. So Latinx was created for folks who fall outside of the gender spectrum of male and female. So if you have a person who is non-binary or genderqueer, who is in the Latinx community, they prefer to use that term, to my understanding, and I might be botching this, but that's what I understand, is just to be more gender inclusive, because Latin language could be very gendered between male and female.
Yeah. It is, I all of these terms, for me, it's interesting, right, in that the diversity has always existed. It's just our understanding and our language of descriptions that have been changing. And I know that those kind of conversations are ongoing in the LGBTQIA plus community, of exactly what they mean, what their parameters are, and the boundaries, and, effective uses, and who gets labeled what, and all of that all the time.
One of my old coworkers, she's been doing this work for 15 years. And so we went and spoke at a church, actually. And one of the parents came up and asked her a question. Their child was recently transitioning and was, kept messing up. And my coworker said, I've been doing this work forever and I still mess up. Like, we are a part of this community and things are constantly changing, and we're having to learn how to be more inclusive. Like, even in our own community, having to be allies to, our LGBTQIA plus family members. There's a lot of self-education that happens, a lot of terms that are constantly changing. And I tell people, I would rather you try and mess up than you just not try at all. And I think a lot of people feel that way, and it's constantly learning, constantly changing. And then also, if we think about gender identity and how, a lot of Indigenous and Indian folks, there's a lot of Indigenous folks too, gender identity being outside of the binary. There's been two spirits, there's been, non-binary people for centuries. But then, European culture came in and kind of whitewashed everything and erased identities that way and made it so that it was only male and female. So now we're getting back, essentially, air quotes, to being more inclusive, remembering that all this stuff is already here, and kind of coming back to ourselves.
Absolutely. So, Bri, thank you so much. I want to be extremely respectful of your time and all of our time. This was amazing. So again, if you're catching this later, make sure you put your questions in the comments later, and after the live is done, and we will make sure that Bri gets them and answers your questions for you. And once again, to all of our viewers, thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to join this movement and contribute to this movement, you can go to www.c3eb.com and register. As soon as you register, you will get an option to donate. Thank you to all of our individual donors, our partners, and our sponsors who are walking the walk with us in this movement. So thank you to Essential IT, Defy the Status Quo Marketing, Zanzibar Enterprises, and the Nielsen Company. And again, most importantly, thank you to our amazing keynote speaker, Bri Jenkins, the love child of Oprah, Beyonce, and Michelle Obama. Make sure you catch her podcast, theteawithbri.com. With that, we will see you in the next session, which starts in just about 5 minutes. Actually, there's one going on right now, and then there's another starting in 5 minutes. So we will see you in one of them. But bye for now from this session, and thank you again, Bri.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.